Because at the end of the day, we're all biased. We can't help it. We have attitudes, thoughts, dispositions, beliefs, values, and they're important. They help make us who we are. But linking back to what I was saying about like cognitive dissonance and when do we hold to our attitudes, when do we change our attitudes or behaviors, it's a complicated process because we're complicated people. And our biases can distort our judgment and influence our decision making. So bias, we're all biased, like I said, and we're going to be looking at 2 types of bias on this slide. The first one is self-serving bias. This is when people attribute positive events to our own internal traits, but attribute negative events to unfortunate circumstances. So this is very similar to our fundamental attribution error. So for example, I got a good grade because I'm smart. I got a bad grade because the test was hard. And maybe it's my teacher's fault. So obviously it's not my fault. So we can kind of see these 2 different, these biases coming in. And an interesting thing is self-serving bias can actually be reversed when it comes to depression or low self-esteem. So for example, I got a good mark. The test must have been easy because I'm not that smart. So that would be an example of a reversed self-serving bias. We can also have confirmation bias, which is the tendency people have to seek, interpret, and remember evidence in ways that confirm our pre-existing expectations and beliefs. So that's, to simplify that, that's when we look for what we want to see. We already want to confirm what we think. We're not objectively analyzing a situation. We just hear what we want to hear. And quite often, unfortunately, that is the case with gossip. When people are talking negatively about other people or spreading a rumor, we're more likely to seek out information and hear what we already know we want to hear, which can be quite detrimental sometimes. And like I said, we all have biases, but it's important to be aware of them so that we can address them when needed. So coming back to the ABCs, the affective, behavioral, and cognitive component, and that can be helpful when we're kind of thinking about the difference between stereotypes and prejudice. Between prejudice and discrimination. So to get some definitions straight again, a stereotype is a collection of thoughts and beliefs about people belonging to a particular group, regardless of individual differences between members. It can be negative or positive. And like I said before, it's often perpetuated by confirmational bias because we look for what we want to see. So an example of this would be like, oh, well, they're a New South Wales supporter. They must be XYZ. You fill in the pre-existing idea you have about this stereotype. And these thoughts and beliefs can be very deeply held and very difficult to undo sometimes, especially if it's a very negative, unhelpful stereotype. And then we have prejudice, which is a negative attitude towards members of another group because they're a part of that group. So for example, looking down on somebody because they're a female or because they're old, because you have a negative attitude towards that group. And that can come from scapegoating, direct experience, personal prejudice, or group prejudice. So prejudice can come from lots of different areas. And then also discrimination is kind of the final part of that. It's the behavior, the outworking. And the behavior is usually directed toward a group and its members based on membership in that group. So discrimination is the behavior. Discrimination is like the expression of prejudice. And people can get very stuck in their ways, unfortunately, which can be very heartbreaking. Coming back to the ABCs, when we're talking about an attitude, it usually has an affective or a feeling or a belief kind of component. It has a behavioral component, and then it has like a cognitive component. So our stereotype and our prejudice could kind of be like our affective or our cognitive component, like our thoughts and beliefs, and then also like our attitudes. And then the behavioral component in this case is discrimination. So prejudice is the negative attitude and discrimination is the antisocial negative behavior.